So, hello everyone. Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Shaun Sanders, an assistant professor in the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology here at the University of Guelph. So Dr. Sanders is currently teaching structure and function in biochemistry and is involved in very interesting research in her neuropalm lab. So thank you so much for coming in today. To start off, could you tell us a bit about yourself and your current career?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm an assistant professor here in MCB. I started here at the University of Guelph June 2020, which was certainly an interesting time to start
Yeah.
as a new professor and starting a lab. And as you said, I teach biochemistry, Bio 3560 right now. Right now that's all I teach in the fall, and but I think in the future I'll probably be teaching intro bio as well and potentially other courses. And yeah, so my lab, we got kind of going late 2020, and we now have a really active research group. So
yeah, that's awesome. So what sparked your interest in science, particularly in the field of molecular and cellular biology, or more specifically in the field of neurodegenerative disorders?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's, I guess, a long, winding road.
Yeah.
I was raised on a farm. I had lived really close to my grandparents. They had a farm, so I spent a lot of time on the farm, like learning about animals and stuff. And my grandpa was an engineer, and so he had a pretty scientific way of approaching things, and so he kind of like instilled that in me. So I think my interest in science started there, and then through high school courses, and I really loved the biology courses I did in high school, and so that led me to UBC in Vancouver to do my undergraduate degree.
Wow.
And there I was found kind of a passion for like the molecular side of things in biology, through lots of genetics courses and like medical genetics courses, which I thought were really cool.
Yeah.
And that led me, after graduating, to do took a year off and worked as a technician in a lab, Dr. Michael Hayden's lab, and that was studying the neurodegenerative disorder Huntington disease. So prior to that, I definitely was like really fascinated with the brain. I just thought it was like such a mystery. But I didn't really do neuroscience per se in my undergraduate. There was no neuroscience program at the time at UBC, undergraduate neuroscience program, so I had to kind of do that later through research. And then it kind of like continues to develop throughout my training, through my PhD and my postdoctoral work, and that kind of like led me to where we are now.
Yeah. Well, you kind of answered my next question here, but the question was, could you tell us about your research background, especially with your work with Dr. Michael Hayden's lab, and your PhD and postdoctoral experiences, and did that influence your research interests now? Yeah,
so I actually didn't mention, I also did research as an undergrad. I had the privilege of having, my uncle is a prof at UBC.
Oh, okay.
And so I got to start volunteering in his lab and doing paid summer jobs in his lab. And I was working on a disorder called Tay-Sachs at the time, which is a really devastating lysosomal storage disorder that affects children and causes neurodegeneration. And then when I did my PhD work at Michael Hayden's lab, working on Huntington disease, that kind of further strengthened my interest in neurodegenerative disorders and neurological disorders in general. It was really cool at UBC and Michael Hayden's lab. We got the opportunity to actually interact with patients, Huntington disease patients, which is just really motivating. So you spend long hours, and you're doing a PhD, long hours in the lab, working really hard, and sometimes you kind of can lose sight of why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Not just for yourself, but kind of for the greater good. And so being able to interact with the Huntington patients while I was doing my PhD really just gave me that unique, really focused kind of perspective on why I wanted to be a scientist. And then I went to Philadelphia to Temple University to do my postdoc, and kind of changed stayed working on, I was working on polymethylation and Huntington disease in Michael's lab. So this is a post-translational lipid modification, and it's thought to kind of go a bit awry in Huntington disease. And since leaving the lab, actually, other people have gone on to try to correct that, and they've actually shown some pretty positive effects of trying to fix the polymethylation problem in Huntington disease, so that's great. So I stayed working on polymethylation and was looking for labs around the world doing polymethylation and neuroscience, and there's only a small handful. It's a pretty niche area. Yeah. And so one of them was in Philadelphia, so that's why one of the reasons I went there. And we were looking at how polymethylation regulates like response to injury. So different type of neurodegeneration where neurons degenerate in response to some kind of injury. And that was kind of one aspect. I did a few other things as well, but certainly everything I did throughout my PhD and postdoc shaped like what we're doing now in the lab. And so it's really common that you kind of develop ideas as you go, as well as like take projects from your postdoc lab in particular to start your own lab. And so you should have, one of the things that's like really important when looking at a postdoc lab is to look for somebody who's going to be supportive of that kind of transition. But yeah, now I'm kind of taking things, developing new projects as well. That's kind of a mishmash of the two. And then once you have students in the lab, they have ideas too, which is amazing, because then we go in all kinds of directions that I never thought possible.
I think that's the best part of science, when you don't know what direction you're going to go into.
100%. Yeah, and sometimes the results lead you there. Like you get these like odd results that you didn't predict, and so that's like, sometimes even more cool.
Yeah, so. For sure. That's awesome. My next question for you is, I guess, more directed to your current research. So could you elaborate on the focus of your current research at the University of Guelph and what, I guess, the main goals of your laboratory are?
Yeah, definitely. So in general, we're interested in how neuronal proteins kind of get where they need to be in the cell, in the neuron, because neurons are really big, really complex cells, and they have this kind of really unique demand on them to get the machinery where it needs to be in the cell, in the neuron. And so we think that polymethylation is playing a really important role in this. And so we're trying to understand how polymethylation can regulate protein localization in neurons. And there's a couple kind of themes within that. So one is the targeting of ion channels, voltage-gated potassium and sodium ion channels, which you learn about in Bio 3560.
Yep.
They're targeting to particular sites in the neuron where action potentials are generated, and how we can kind of regulate that in order to control how easily the neuron fires an action potential. Because what happens in kind of classic disorders like epilepsies and ataxias, there's too much neuron activity. And so if we can try to modulate the ion channels and their presence at these sites of excitability where the electrical impulse is generated, then we might be able to kind of tune down some of that excess excitability in neurons. So that's not really neurodegeneration, but more like excitability disorders. We do have kind of basic science projects as well, just trying to understand how the transport machinery works and how it gets the energy required, where that comes from to drive the transport by like kinesin and dynein motors, which I don't know what course you learned that about that in, but probably cell biology. And then we also have we do have a Huntington disease project, which that's kind of one of the things that's like a real amalgamation of my postdoc and my PhD work, trying to understand some of the factors we found are important in degeneration after injury from my postdoc work, and seeing if they're also important in Huntington disease, because there's a lot of new drugs being developed for that pathway, and so if it's also playing a role in Huntington disease, that could be a new treatment avenue. And then the final kind of area, I guess, is the not neurons per se, but a new project that PhD student in the lab, came up with, Andre, he came to me with an idea for like a glioblastoma, like brain cancer project, which is a really cool new project. And I've never worked on cancer before, but yeah, with kind of his expertise and mind together, we're kind of going in a new direction. So that's really fun.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So my next question is kind of off of what you said. So your research seems to have like a significant implication for understanding neurological disorders. So how do you envision the outcomes of your research contributing to the advancements in our understanding of neurological disorders and potential therapeutic interventions?
Yeah, I mean, that's the obvious kind of end goal of my research. I mean, that would be amazing if one day something that we do in the lab leads to a new treatment. We're seeing that a little bit potentially with the Huntington disease project work I did as a PhD student. I would love, that would be amazing if something from my lab goes in the same kind of direction and leads to a new treatment. That's always kind of the end goal of what we're doing. And so whether it's even just trying to understand the biology of what's going wrong in a neurological disorder to kind of open up new avenues, new places to intervene with drugs. I'm not, say, a drug development expert. I'm not like a chemist. So that would be taking those kinds of things to the next steps. Like that would be something that I'd probably hand off to somebody else. But I have designed drugs, or been part of the design of drug screens, and so we could potentially, start to screen like drug libraries, and then hand it off kind of to the medicinal chemists who can take it to the next step. But that's my ultimate dream of like our research, that we would end up kind of pushing knowledge to the point where we're able to develop new drug targets. Yeah. So a lot of these neurological disorders, things have been tried, but nothing successful yet, and so I think we really need to do a lot of legwork on the kind of basic side of like understanding what's really going wrong to develop new targets.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this next question is going to be kind of deep.
Okay.
Which have you kind of encountered any like obstacles or challenges throughout your research pathway? And if so, what steps have you taken to overcome them?
Okay. So definitely. There's a lot of like day-to-day challenges. Science is sometimes exhausting and kind of hard, it requires a lot of perseverance. Oftentimes your experiments just like won't work, and it can be really frustrating. And so just like figuring out how to kind of just keep going, or sometimes realize that you actually probably just need to take a break and go do something fun that's totally different, relax, and then come back refreshed. And often that will like lead to the kind of aha moment that will fix the problem. That's the day-to-day. That's really common in science and research. It's just, it can be pretty grueling. When you do get those new findings, it always makes it totally worth it in the end, because it's like the most exciting kind of moment as a scientist, discovering something new. On a kind of bit more of a personal level, I guess, like I met my husband. I was doing my PhD when I met my husband, and he's also an academic, and he was doing his postdoc, and there's this thing called the two-body problem in academia, where it's really hard to get to kind of faculty positions as professors. They're hard to get regardless, and to get two is even harder, right? And so we moved together to Philadelphia, so he kind of like left when I was done. I stuck around as a postdoc in my PhD lab for like a year and a half. And then we moved together, so he kind of ended his first postdoc a little early, and then did a second postdoc. And so we were in Philadelphia together for a while. And then he started applying for faculty positions, and he got a job at University of Waterloo. So when I started looking for positions not long after, we always agreed that we would only live apart for like the faculty position, and only for a brief period. And so we lived apart for a year and a half when I was applying for jobs, and well, I didn't limit myself only to Southwest Ontario. It was super convenient that he got a job in Southwest Ontario because there's so many universities here with a
Yeah.
business. So that was like a big stroke of luck, I think, for us. And so he moved to Waterloo, and I stayed in Philadelphia, and then I applied to everything in this area. I also applied across Canada, but definitely like really focused my efforts here. And then I somehow managed to get this job here at the University of Guelph.
Yeah.
And it's perfect because Guelph and Waterloo are only about half hour, 40 minutes apart,
Yeah.
and so it worked out perfectly, and we're like really, really lucky that it did. So that was definitely a big kind of struggle and a really big concern for a while. Like, are we both going to get the job we want?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for sharing. That was, I'm sure a lot of students are going to find that very helpful. I also was wondering if you could answer, how do you balance your roles as a researcher, educator, and mentor? And what advice do you have for students on finding a similar balance in their academic journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I'm still learning, I think. I think a lot of those are related as well. Obviously, being a mentor and a researcher is very closely related, but I also mentor undergraduate students outside of the research lab kind of capacity. And then I also think that it's really important to give the next generation of researchers or other types of health professionals, you know, I'm not just interested in training undergrads to be researchers, I'm interested in making sure they're well-rounded to be whatever career they want. But a lot of that starts in the classroom, and so I think the education part of it is really important as well. And, I think, you know, we have, as faculty, how we're kind of supposed to be splitting our time in terms of education versus, or like teaching versus research. And so, you know, the university gives us a bit of a like percentage time that we're supposed to be spending on these things. But I think for me, in a teaching semester, I'll spend a lot of time on teaching versus a semester that's I'm not teaching, I'll be in the, you know, doing more research. And so it's just kind of balancing what the immediate needs are and trying to plan my time. So I'll schedule my time and I keep kind of to-do lists that are prioritized. So I need to get these things done this week, and then like this is a longer term thing, but it's a big thing that's coming up, so I need to spend some time on it. So just trying to keep like a running to-do list that gives you immediate things that have to be done, but also the bigger picture, so that you don't get to like say the end of a semester and have a massive project that you haven't started, right? Keeping it on your to-do list through the entire semester so that you kind of keep that in your mind and you're continually working on it throughout the semester. I think it's really just, it's all about time management and just being like really organized and strict with your time.
Thank you. I think especially the comment about keeping the big picture is very important for us as we head into midterms and finals.
Yeah, it's really easy to like lose perspective of that when you're in the moment, like putting the fires out, right? Dealing with that assignment and this quiz and this midterm, like in the moment. It's hard to kind of keep in mind the bigger picture, and so that's why I like to use like to-do lists that I look at, 15 times in a day. And it includes everything from like, preparing the midterm for tomorrow to like, making sure the final's ready in like 3 months or whatever it is, like.
Thank you for sharing. This next question has to do with like laboratory techniques. So for students interested in pursuing a similar research path, what skills do you recommend they improve on to succeed in the field?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, in terms of technical skills in the lab, a lot of it, can just be trained one-off, but I think like in my lab, one of the like really key skills is like pipetting, so being really familiar with how to use micropipettes, how to use serological pipettes, even if it's in theory, initially because a lot of students come into lab with no experience, and that's totally okay, but it's super helpful if you know the theory. That's kind of like nothing's going to work if you can't pipette.
Yeah.
So that's like really basic. And then it kind of goes from there in terms of getting more technical. But like I said, a lot of that can be trained hands-on in the lab, and that's the best place for it to be learned anyway. But I think there's softer skills that are really important too, like learning how to read a paper, like a published paper. How do you critically review it and read it, and maybe, you know, think about what things you want to take from that paper to your own research, and what did you like about it, what did you not like about it, what was not good about it. You know, learning how to think about how to control experiments, like what are your positive and negative controls. So if you develop those skills through, you know, even before you get into a lab by reading papers, then once you're designing your own experiments, it's easier, because you're already so familiar with thinking about what is this experiment, how do I set up the proper controls, how do I design the experiment appropriately, and those are things you can work on before you're even in a lab.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like a lot of those things are important right now as well.
Yeah.
Especially in these like 3rd and 4th year courses that a lot of students are taking.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's where you really start to have to do that more in classes as well, and there's definitely a reason for that. And I think it's like learning to think critically and read critically is something that's obviously really important in science, but I think it like applies to life as well, because we get constantly all this information thrown at us through like, you know, social media and whatever, like all this like, is this real, is this true, is this somebody just making this up? So to be able to like think critically about what you're reading, no matter the source, is a really important skill to have like a good functioning society. Yeah.
So before we conclude, do you have any advice that you'd like to share for students interested in pursuing a career in molecular and cellular biology?
Definitely. I think for students early on in their undergraduate careers, so 1st and 2nd years, go talk to your profs. Go to the office hours. Let me tell you, I sit by myself here most of the time. And I'm here to help you, so if you have questions, then come ask, and don't be afraid of your profs. I know that's hard advice to take, because profs, I know we're intimidating, but honestly, we're here to help you. We enjoy helping you with the content. If you don't have any questions about the content, just go to your prof and ask them about their research. They love talking about their research. So it's a good way to like get them talking. So if you start to get to know your profs early on, then those are the people that you can reach out to in 3rd and 4th year for positions, research positions, whether it's a 4th year project for credit, or a summer research position, or a potential grad study, you know, master's or PhD position later. The other thing is, if for students for other professional, health science professional careers, you need good reference letters. And if you're one of 400 students in my Bio 3560 class, and I've never seen your name before or your face before, and like office hours or something, I'm going to write you the letter because you need it, but all it's going to be able to say is that this is the course, they took the course, this is the grade they got. But if you come to my office hours and I get to know you, or come up to me after class and get to know me, then I can suddenly say so much more. It's a stronger letter.
Yeah.
And so there are many reasons why you should really try and get to know your profs. And if you're really interested in somebody's research and you think you might want a research position in their lab one day, ask them about their work, send them an email, tell them why you think their work is cool or interesting or important to you. That is going to be the thing that sets you apart from everybody else, because we get a lot of generic emails from students that just they're sending out the same email to 15 profs, and it's clear. And so if you show like a genuine, like a specific interest in the work that's happening in my lab, then it's going to like immediately make you stand out from the crowd. And I've had students that have reached out to me, you know, from 3560, and they just want to like come and meet with me and like learn about my research, and I never say no to students that just want to come in and chat. So and then down the road they reach out to me later, and I, you know, remember them, and that kind of, it's a good way to network, build your network,
Yeah.
and get to kind of know the research that's happening around the campus and see what you might be interested in doing. And, you know, I think continuing that kind of networking through your more senior years, also going to, you know, like a bunch of the student societies hold things like pizza and prof nights, or I just did the painting and with prof nights, which was super fun, and it was great because I think it helped give us all something to do.
Yeah.
You know, well, it's kind of awkward at first.
Yeah.
So go to those things. They're great. They're super fun, and we like doing them. So yeah, just get involved in your campus and your classes, and that's going to set you up.
For sure. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think networking isn't talked about enough, especially in these upper years, about how important they are.
Yeah, definitely. And I know we're kind of in a weird time because we're kind of leaving the pandemic or whatever, and it was really hard for students, obviously, that did all or part of their undergrad degree through the pandemic. I mean, it was almost impossible, or if not impossible, to form those connections. So now's the time. Get out there. Go up to your prof after class. Like, just ask any dumb question. It doesn't matter. We don't care. And you know, but it gives you the opportunity to get to know your profs.
Yeah.
So we're going to get to know you.
Well, I guess that's kind of towards our end. Thank you, Dr. Sanders, for sharing your insight and experience with us today. It's been a pleasure learning about your journey and your impactful research at your neuropalm lab. Oh my gosh. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. This was super fun. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, anytime.